Spotlight situations are those moments when you, as a leader, have to communicate under pressure. The stakes are high and the outcome really matters. It might be having a conversation with a team member that's really sensitive, or having a meeting with a client that isn't going so well. It might even be speaking to your whole community, or perhaps doing a media interview. And would you agree, in the incredibly turbulent times we've been through, and looking to a future that's brimming with hope, but also filled with uncertainty, we're going to be facing more and more spotlight situations. Are you ready for those? See, your team doesn't know who to trust right now. Research from Edelman is telling us that trust in all levels of government never been lower. Gee, that's a big surprise. Trust in all forms of media never been lower. So, who is your team going to trust? Well, now is the time you ought to be going and looking in the mirror, because it's you. And you. And you. The institution that people are trusting more than anyone at the moment is their employer. So if you're an employer or a team leader, your team is looking at you to make sense of what is going on right now. Leaders who are outstanding communicators in spotlight situations understand what I call the balance of credibility. Now, you've probably heard the balance of probability. This is the balance of credibility. Stephen M.R. Covey, in his fabulous book, The Speed of Trust, talks about this idea of having two elements in equal measure if you're to be considered credible. Now, the first one of those is competence. Not a big surprise there. Of course, you've got to be competent. You've got to know what you're doing, and you've got to convey that you know what you're doing for people to have faith in you, to look on you as credible, to build trust with you. But that's only half of the equation. That's only one side of the scales in the balance of credibility. The other side, as Covey describes it, is your character. Now, that includes your integrity, how you live your values, but it also includes the connections you make when you're communicating with people, the relationships you create, the rapport you build. And so in the balance of credibility, you need both of these elements in equal measure. I mean, think about it. If you're all competence, if you're all seriousness, subject matter expert, you run the risk of being considered what I would call a dry disseminator. You're all facts, but nobody's listening to you because you don't engage with them. On the other hand, if you're all the connection, if you're all about the relationships without the substance, you run the risk of being looked on as a likeable lightweight. All froth, but nothing solid behind you. So you're not going to be considered credible. You need both of those elements. And I wonder if I were to ask you, who on the world stage right now, with everything that we've been going through, would you consider really nails this idea of the balance of credibility? I wonder who would come to mind. Now, I'm just going to ask you to think about this. Who is the leader who comes to mind? And I ask many groups this question, and I reckon many of you are thinking of one name, one person, and it's this woman, Jacinda Ardern. What is it that has made half the world fall in love with Jacinda? Anybody here got a crush on Jacinda? So I'm not the only one. Well, it's because of this. Jacinda really understands this idea of the balance of credibility. It's like yin and yang. You've got to have both of those elements in equal measure. On the character side, she's very real. She can be quite playful, especially when her young child interrupts her during important meetings. We can relate to her. She's a normal person. On the other hand, who can forget her steely resolve after the Christchurch shootings? And She was every inch the credible leader, the statesperson in those moments. So that balance of the two. So as a leader, when you communicate, how do you rate your performance in the balance of credibility? Are you too far down the competence side without the character, or are you all character without the subject matter expertise showing? You need both in equal measure, because after all, your credibility is your currency. I'd go so far as to say it's your cryptocurrency, assuming that crypto's performing well right now, and who knows, it goes up and down, doesn't it? Your credibility is your cryptocurrency. So don't squander it. Manage it wisely. Invest in it. Make sure that you're taking the steps so that it will grow. Now, the issue is, would you agree, that many leaders are pretty strong on the competency side and they forget the rapport, the connection, the relationship side of communication, especially in spotlight situations. They treat communication a little bit like this, but perhaps with fewer tats. So this woman at a gym is pushing the weights across the floor, and often that's how leaders treat communication. Can you relate? Pushing information out. I've got something important to say. You need to hear it. I'm going to push it out. I'm going to spray it at you in a meeting, on a Zoom or Teams call, or in an email. A pushing outward motion, but that's not effective, particularly in high-stakes situations. Social researcher Hugh Mackay reminds us this. It's the message people take away, not the message we send, that determines our success as a communicator. Just let that one land for a moment. When you're communicating with your team, with your customers, your clients, with the broader community, are you thinking about the message they're taking away? The message they need to understand, believe and act on? Or is it all about the message you're pushing outward? The second quality of leaders who excel in spotlight situations is this. They have learned to manage their personal state. You know, great communication is an inside job. Yes, first and foremost, you think about your audience and tailor it to them. But next up, you've got to be super conscious of what's going on inside you. As I said, in my experience, even the most senior leaders still have doubts and insecurities. Most of us do. But the great ones have learned to transcend that. In those moments where they've got to step up in a critical situation and deliver a message that has to be said and everything about it is difficult, they have learned the skills to put aside their doubts and insecurities. The argument they might have had with their spouse or their kids that morning, the traffic on the way to wherever they're going, all of those stressors that many of us face on a daily basis, they have learned to put those aside temporarily so that when they step into the spotlight, they are 100% there. They can deal with the situation that's immediately in front of them in that moment. They can be at their absolute best for the people who need to hear that information.